Yeah? Okay.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. I hope you enjoy your EuroPython night yesterday. And today we are here. And if you are here, maybe you wondered how to use the new Django user models. And Lynn Root is here to explain. Thank you, Lynn.
Thank you. So the title of my talk, Getting Django to Play with Old Friends, or maybe some foes. Okay, it's 9 a.m. I'm not awake yet either. So my name is Lynn Root. I work at Red Hat as a software engineer. I am Rogue Lynn on the interwebs. I'm the leader/founder of the PyLadies of San Francisco, and I'm also a board member of the Python Software Foundation. So at Red Hat, I work on the free IPA team, and so pardon my spiel. I have to talk about it a little bit. So the IPA does not stand for the India Pale Ale. I'm sorry. It actually stands for Identity, Policy, and Audit, except we don't have the audit yet, so don't tell anybody. It's more like alpha. So what free IPA is an identity management system for Linux that easily hooks up into Windows Active Directory. And it's written all in Python. And basically, it's all about taking the pain of setting up Kerberos for Linux systems. And so I work on integration. Right now, I'm Kerberizing the OpenShift product, which is a platform as a service like Heroku. You might have noticed the desk outside. And so it can easily hook up into free IPA and to leverage single sign-on within a corporate environment. More fun than it sounds, I promise. And so what I'm going to talk about is an explain like I'm 5 version of Kerberos, and then setting up a custom user within Django, and then how to hook that up into external authentication as well as external permissions and authorization. And all these slides and blog posts that associate with this is on this website, and I'll show it to you again at the end, so don't worry about anything. So everyone has a pointy-haired boss, right? Maybe a pointy-haired client. All about micromanagement and incompetence, maybe unaware. Am I the only one? No. I love my boss, I swear. Clients do count, so it's okay. So perhaps your pointy-haired boss or your client needs a web application, and it has to be an internal web app that is supposed to capitalize on synergy, streamline costs, leverage assets, all those freaking buzzwords that we all hear in the corporate environment. And so, yeah, I work for Red Hat, and so I'm in the corporate environment, so I'm going to try and create that sort of atmosphere for you with all these buzzwords. And so your first question maybe is, can you use Postgres or favorite database and for Django's, and with Django's default auth mechanism? But of course not. You have to use single sign-on. We're trying to avoid managing separate user credentials and needing to log into the required mission-critical synergy app. So first off, explain like I'm 5. What is Kerberos? What does this single sign-on mean? And so pretend this is 5-year-old you, and you want to play some games. Maybe you're at a carnival or something. You have to ask your dad for money, and so you can go buy a ticket to play. So dad gives you a few bucks, because he's awesome and nice. And then you go to a clerk to buy a ticket to play. Your money is good. So the clerk will give you a ticket for the game, but it's a ticket that only you can use, because the ticket has some super secret special DNA fingerprint technology. And so basically now you can play until your money runs out. So that was a brief overview of what Kerberos is, but now the legitimate explanation. Explain you're 25 years old, Kerberos. And so Kerberos is a protocol for authentication. And it's based on tickets for users and key tabs for machines or services. And it aims to avoid sending passwords over the internet. While there is an implementation for asymmetric, the vanilla flavored Kerberos is based on symmetric key cryptology with shared secrets. And so with the trivia-loving folks, Kerberos names comes from Greek mythology. It's named after a 3-headed guard dog for Hades, and it's kind of apt because there's a third party, the key distribution center, to authenticate between a client and a service or a host machine. And so for a bigger explanation, here is the Kerberos realm within these two smaller boxes. We have the KDC clients and then the key distribution center, which could be one machine or two. And so you have the auth server and the ticket granting server. And you want to access like an HTTP service, just basically a website. And so when you log into a machine or you kin it into your machine, you send just a plain text request to the auth server. And the auth server just looks you up, says, all right, I can find you, and gives you two messages back, one that you can read and one that you cannot. And just contains this information, the ID for the service that you want to access, and then a ticket to go to the ticket granting server. So you go to the ticket granting server with the request, the authenticator of who you are, and the ticket granting ticket that the ticket granting server can read. This is what it contains. So since you want to access the HTTP service, the TGS will look you up look it up in the KDC. It says, all right, I recognize this HTTP service. And it gives you back two more messages, one that you can read and one that you cannot. And contains this information of who you are and a timestamp, as well as ticket for the HTTP service. And so now you go to the HTTP service, the website, and send two messages, both of which can be read by the HTTP service. Contains like IDs and timestamps, IP addresses, and who you are. And then responds saying, all right, this is who I am. And then, of course, you can read it. And supposedly all is good, and there's a connection made. Now you can just access the HTTP service without going through the third party again for the lifetime of the ticket. A little complicated. It's okay. This is all in the blog post, so I go into more depth about the technology with it too. So if you're curious, go there. And so how can Django play with Kerberos now? So you want to use the new user models, and you can leverage the Django's new user models. So a quick overview of the program, or the problem. You want to use the new user models for your application, because you do. And so you have to hook up with a corporate/internal system for user auth and implement single sign-on within your application. So, oh my God, what are these new user models? What do they mean? Basically, 1.5 has these new user models, and you can use email addresses or Twitter names for user identifiers rather than just a 30-character username. And it can be longer than 30 characters. So we're going to create a dummy application. For the sake of simplicity of this talk, this is just one website and one single app. And so while you're hooking into a predefined user database that will take care of authentication and perhaps authorization, you'll still define your own custom model by inheriting from abstract user base with your own additions, like so. So here's an example of my own custom user model. I'm inheriting from abstract user. And I have a longer username than the pre-1.5 standard. And then I also add required fields like synergy level. So this is within your models.py. And then you also need to have a user manager because you're also requiring synergy level. So an example of the Kerb user manager within the same models.py, you just need to define the two functions, create user and create super user, just to make sure that it contains your synergy level. This needs to be referred to in your Kerb user model, just in the same models.py, just objects equals Kerb user manager. And within the Kerb user class, you can also define the get full name, short name, and is active, which I also detail a little bit more on my blog. All right, so hopefully that makes sense a little bit. Moving on to settings.py, we just have to set a few variables to make Django a team player. So we set our user auth user model to what we made, the Kerb user class. And then we have middleware, which we have the standard authentication middleware, but then we also add remote user middleware. And then Django also gives us a backend that we can implement the remote user backends. Yeah, what's a team player? Yeah. So this is a standard Kerberos username, and it's kind of ugly. You have the user at realm, and it might be the email address of the user, and it might not. But perhaps you just want the username portion of the Kerberos username. So we need to make it more client-centric. So you can do this of two ways. You can strip the realm in two ways. You can first do that in the Django app, which might be easier for folks that do not have access to the Kerberos system. And basically, you just sort of write your own, or inherit from remote user backend and just strip the realm. And then, more client-centric. And then adjust your authentication backend to what you just wrote. Any team player? You can also do this within Apache if you like Apache, and I don't know who does. But basically, you can set this to on. The curb local user mapping is on, and then the modauth curb will take care of just the stripping of the realm. All right, so now you want to access the user. And when someone sends like a HTTP request. So a quick overview of sort of what happens is a HTTP request is sent through some middleware and then into the Django view functions. And an unauth request passes through some middleware, maybe some sessions, and then hits the auth middleware, in which Django itself takes care of the authentication. But when you use a remote user middleware, it like bounces out and defers to Apache or maybe another installation of authentication. And then when the request comes back through the more middleware and into the view functions, the remote user header is added to the HTTP request. So you might have seen this before. Request.meta remote user is how you can grab the username itself. And if you allow Django or Apache to like strip the realm, it should just be like pointy-haired boss. All right. So that's pretty much how you set up Django to like defer for authentication. But how do I Apache? The anti-buzzword, if you will. And many folks don't have a choice to work with Apache. So your environment is Kerberos and Apache. And so far, you've set up your app to defer authentication to the web server, but now you have to configure the web server for Kerberos and your application. So within your Apache configuration, this is an example. Here you have to import the module, the modauth curb, and this does not come standard within. If you just install Apache, you have to install the modauth curb as well. So you just limit your location, and so we make sure that modauth curb is there. We're trying to access HTTP service with Apache, so you have to make sure that it is enrolled with the Kerberos realm. I'm kind of breezing over that. And then you also need a key tab for the service, so folks can access it. And basically, this always gets me. You have to make sure that the key tab can be read by Apache. And so back to the example configuration. If you turn this off, the curb method password off, that means that only folks with a valid ticket can access the service. But if you keep it on and they don't have a valid ticket, then they can authenticate over basic. All right, and then here earlier I mentioned that the curb local user mapping is on, therefore the Apache will take care of stripping of the realm. And then we have our service name that is enrolled in Kerberos. HTTP that prefaces the Riverbar root cloud is the type of service. For instance, you could have like DNS or LDAP as a service as well. And then our key tab, which is just where the location where we put our key tab. All right, so it's pretty easy to set up Apache if you kind of know what you're doing, but you have to make sure if it actually negotiates. So the protocol to make sure that Kerberos works is you use negotiate, and you can test it through curl, request.py, and through your browser as well. And in my blog, I outline these 3 tactical ways to test, but I'm only going to go through curl because that's the easiest right now. So perhaps you curl and you do -- negotiate -u with an empty string of user and password, and then the fully qualified domain name of what you're testing. So for example, you can it in as u, and then you can list the tickets that you have, and you'll see the ticket cache. And down there I have a TGT for the default principal, which is myself. And then I curl my app fully qualified domain name with the negotiate and -u with empty string. And this basically tells negotiate to use a protocol called spnego in order to talk to our server and negotiate. And you'll see two responses. One is from the server, there's a 4.1 saying it's basically negotiating which protocol to use. Then the client sends like a hashed ticket information over on the HTTP header and returns with a 200. And so if we look at, if we do klist again, we have a second service principal, the fact that we access HTTP. And so if you remember, we had to go through the auth server, then the ticket server, and then now we have a ticket for HTTP. And real quickly, the other two that you can test to see if negotiate works. The request library also has a Kerberos extension. It's actually really easy to test, and I detail it within the associated blog post on how to use requests to test if your Kerberos setup is correct. And then within browsers, Apple is kind of awesome, and Safari is already automatically set up for negotiate protocol. But there's additional, a little bit confusing configuration for Internet Explorer, Firefox, and Chrome. And then I also show how to configure that as well. Okay, so we make sure that it negotiates. And now, just real quick, I know this is not news to anyone, but there's a difference between authentication and authorization. And it really peeves me when someone just says auth and confuses the two. So the first, of course, is who you are, and the second is what you can do. And so with Django, when we use the remote user backend and with middleware, it doesn't automatically grab what the user can do. It's just authentication. However, it'd be really nice if you could hook up in the database to see what group they're a part of and define permissions based on that. So if you want to access permissions, typically LDAP holds users and groups through the member of parameter, right? So you can bind to LDAP to see what the group the user is a member of, and define what the authorization is for that user within your app logic. But there's actually a couple different ways. So you can connect to LDAP, as I mentioned before, just to check to see if user is a member of admins or team players or movers and shakers. And there's a few different ways to connect to LDAP through your Django app. You can write your own backend to connect to LDAP, or there are two libraries. There's the Django auth LDAP and the Django LDAP groups library. Yeah, in the Kerberos environment, it's a little bit more difficult because you do need a key tab, a second key tab to access LDAP, and you need wide read privileges for that key tab, so that might not be what you want. The second way, with a free API environment, because we're awesome, it stores information in LDAP, but through a nicer approach with these system calls through SSSD, which is another product that FreeIP uses. So if you did get group user, it grabs what's actually in FreeIP's LDAP. So you can do local system calls with a Python wrapper like getInt package, and easily see what the what group the user is a member of. Third approach is probably the more appropriate approach, since you're defaulting to Apache, or deferring to Apache for authentication. You should probably do that for authorization as well. And so we have modauth curb for authentication, but then you might want to use mod auth external and the pwauth to defer to PAM for group lookup. And you kind of have to hack around the pwauth in order for it to accept empty strings for user and password to force key tab or ticket auth. And it's a little confusing, and it's a little bit of hack, but it's the most appropriate way to go to defer to Apache for authorization. Confusing, I know, but a lot of the information is on my blog, so if anything is not clear, read it and then ask me questions, I guess. Has anyone ever set up Kerberos themselves? 1, 2. Oh, come on. It's it's a pain to not use LDAP or not use free IPA and to set up Kerberos yourself, especially in a Linux environment. So so what I've done is I've actually made on my GitHub is a vagrant sort of box that you can have two machines. One's a client, one's a server. And if you can put your app on the client and then test to see if it works in a Kerberos environment, but it's contained so you won't mess up anything. So I encourage you to use it if you want to play around, see if your app works in a Kerberos environment before you actually deploy it on the internal corporate environment. But one word of caution, do not install IPA locally on your machine or any other Kerberos setup, because then you'll probably mess up your own identity management system on your computer. All right. So in review, I went over, explained I'm 5 and 25 of Kerberos, custom user model with single sign-on, integrating Django apps with single sign-on, and how to access permissions for your app. And so I went over a lot, but you're the point person for this now. You get everything, right? Right? Come on. All right, so that was a quick overview, but everything is up on this website, and I encourage you to read through much more detailed information, but that's it. Thank you.
Okay, I'm not sure to get it. So you've got your user model, and then you do mode authentication. So is anything persisted in the database?
It saves. So if you're a new user, it'll save the username, but it'll just defer the authentication. So if a user first signs on to the app, it'll grab the username, save it into the database, but not check for passwords. So basically defer to Apache for passwords, but still have the username in the database, if that makes sense.
All right, and so if I want to grab a ton of information from the LDAP server, is that possible?
Say that again?
If I want to grab a ton of information from the LDAP server, like email configuration and that kind of
Sure.
stuff.
That's possible, but I don't think your IT would like that, because you need access to the LDAP, your application does, and it's not the appropriate way to go about. But you can, and in a Kerberos environment, you need a key tab to access LDAP, and there's not a lot of limits on there, so you can do a lot of damage if you get a key tab to access LDAP. So the best way is to do it through the Apache module that I was talking about, the auth and the mod auth nz external, and defer to PAM for the group stuff. Or maybe system calls, like the get int group user. Especially with IPA, it'll cache everything locally that's already in LDAP, so you won't actually have to connect to LDAP.
Any other questions?
Did I put everyone to sleep? I mean, it's still really early.
You talked about Apache. Is there any support in other web servers like Nginx?
There is a similar Kerberos module for Nginx, but it's use at your own risk kind of thing, and it might segfault. So there's no real support for it, but it exists.
They are shy.
Hi. Have you tried moving from a Kerberos configuration in Apache to the application itself, like something like the SAP-Nego middleware of Whiskey?
Say that again?
Have you tried moving from the Apache configuration of Kerberos to the backend, writing the SAP-Nego authentication in Python? No?
Yeah, no, I haven't.
There is a Whiskey middleware for it.
Yeah.
It's very... I hate the mod Kerberos for Apache. It's very old, broken in various way.
Yeah.
Give a look to it.
I will look into it. Thank you.
No more questions? No? Okay, it seems. Thank you, Lynn.
Thank you, Chuck.